And we are recording. Unbreakable 2000 Thoughts Film. First off, happy holidays and a merry, messy Christmas. Oh, note to self, Christmas has an H in it. And an R, and an I, and an S. Also a T, an M, an A, and another S. Oh, and I've missed out this at the beginning. In fact, I appear to be the first person in history who's managed to spell the word Christmas and not get a single letter right. Now, this video contains spoilers. It's a long video, but there are time codes for the different sections in the description box. I will probably do other videos. I certainly will on the other films in this series, and the links to that will be in the description box once I've made those videos. And I'm going to try not to restate what I say here in those videos and not say in this video what I will go into more detail on in those videos. Excuse me. I'd fire the lighting guy if it wasn't myself. And since this movie was a present, nothing, anything negative I say in this is not out of bitterness of having spent too much money. Now, I originally watched this in 2008, and back then I gave it a 7 out of 10, and I think I do basically stand by that. At the same time, I have to say in some ways this is one of my favorite movies. I mean, personal enjoyment, it's a 10 out of 10. It's like with, I'm not sure if I've said this in videos, but, Wonder Woman overall, as, if I'm trying to look at it critically, I have not started the timer, there we go. Looking at it critically, I'd rate it a 7 out of 10, but personally it's a perfect 10 out of 10. I've watched it 4 times by now, I guess, and each time I love it. I love watching it, and I love all that's in it and the way it's presented. So, yeah. But I do try to be critical when I give the main rating. Now, starting with notes taken while watching. I quite like the opening text, and those numbers are pretty incredible. Great opening scene, really powerful, and great comic book framing in the cinematography. Good use of the mirror, and it's very effective when the doctor outright asks, did you drop this baby? And really I mean, he seems almost convinced that he's going to get a yes. He cannot believe what he's seeing. Now, while I will 100% admit it is not always the case, I do stand by, it is often a good way to start your comic book movie or comic book by a strong introduction to either the hero or the villain. And here, although we don't know it yet, it's the villain. This is sort of, yeah, perhaps one of the most defining things about Elijah is the fact that his bones are so brittle. And yeah, I mean, they could have had this scene as a flashback. They could have opened the movie in another way. But it is genuinely, when you start with a character's birth and there's something unusual there that kind of defines, there's a, I'm not sure I can necessarily come up with good examples off the top of my head, but it is a good way to, yeah. Now, I love how the camera, excuse me, I love how the camera moves, creating comic book framing in the train scene, and I haven't seen this in very many other movies, and I've watched quite a few movies. And, you know, there is an in-universe explanation. We're seeing the POV of this girl who's listening in on the conversation. And I didn't note this, but I'll say it before I forget to. I really like that after, you know, once Kelly, she has a name, once Kelly, you know, moves to another seat, there's, you know, but David looks directly at the girl again, and I don't know that the girl necessarily completely understands what transpired or such, but there is, like, you know, before she smiled at David, and now she doesn't. She looks a little disappointed in him, maybe. She got a positive initial impression of him, and yeah, you know, she can't necessarily put words to it, but she can tell that David has done something wrong, you know. Now, and you know, it is genuinely sad when the conversation goes wrong, even though the audience realized, you know, David was trying to cheat on his wife. You know, I realized that they say, oh, we're having problems, and she does claim that it's not going to affect her either way if he did or did not sleep with someone, but they are still together, and they're, you know, yeah. So, and you know, great acting on Kelly. She makes an impression even though she has very little screen time. Considering her screen time, she actually has a remarkable amount of dialogue. You know, the main characters spend a lot of chunks of the movie with fairly few lines of dialogue. You know, it's a more visual movie. Now, and the tension builds incredibly well as gradually we realize, you know, we become increasingly certain that there's something wrong, that the train is moving at too high of a speed. I appreciate that when when Joseph, I want to say, when I started doing these notes, I couldn't remember the characters' names other than David, but Joseph, David's kid, when he sees the news of his father's train crash, he wasn't just already watching the news, he was actually channel hopping, as you do. You know, we get the sense that he's maybe not got the greatest attention span. He's a little bored, so he's just going between channels. You know, of course we do have the you know, conveniently he happens to, you know, the news report on the thing that he cares about when he happens to watch. But yeah, and it's a nice little, like, you know, when he sees that on the news, they say, you know, what was it, East Trail 177, I want to say, which is apparently also what the trilogy is called, or going to be called. You know, Unbreakable trilogy, or East Rail 177 trilogy. I guess in this particular video, I'm not going to give away what the second entry is for those who don't already know and want to be surprised, but if you watch the trailer for Glass, if you know much of anything about the movie Glass, which is of course why I'm doing videos on this and the second entry, because Glass is coming to theaters, if I had known that the second one was going to take place in the same universe as this, I might have watched it in theaters. I found out when it was already, you know, after it had premiered, and I try to watch close to premiere. And at the end of the day, I'm mostly excited about I was excited to watch this again, and I'm really excited to watch Glass, but I am looking forward to watching the second entry. It's just not, yeah. I'll go into it in that video, I expect. Yeah, right, back to the scene. The kid, he hears the mention of the name, and he runs into the kitchen, and you've got the little, what's it called? Post-it note? Something like that. Yeah, and, he runs in there, and, yeah, it says Israel 177, so, and that's, again, I'm not saying that that's unique to this movie or unique to movies inspired by comic books, but that is a very comic book way to have that, maybe a more typical movie thing, it would be him calling his mother and saying, isn't Dad's train the Israel 177 or something like that, but yeah, a nice visual way of telling that. Now, let's see. And when the doctor, and I really like the actor, I forgot to look up. He's also in Man of Steel, really, really like that guy. But yeah, he works at the, at the Daily Planet, I want to say it's called. I really should know that. He works with Lois Lane. Yeah, when the doctor is talking to David, and we see, we've got it's almost kind of the background. Here is the two people, and then up in the foreground, without us being able to see completely what's going on, we see a little bit of gauze, and gradually blood starts seeping through, and we've got the hands of the two people. Clearly they're trying to save this guy's life. That's also very reminiscent of a comic book. You'll have something in the foreground that's gradually happening. It's an economical way of telling a story. And a lot of comic books, there's a lot of story. They have to communicate as quickly as they can. So, yeah. And I also like, it's never, and that's also very comic book. Like, the doctor never says, look, out there they are trying to save this man's life. He just says, in a few minutes you're most likely going to be the only survivor of this crash, so the audience can put two and two together, and and again, without nobody goes like, I need a crash cart or anything, but just from the visual, at first you see the gauze, and I think maybe within a minute or so of the shot opening, gradually the blood starts seeping through the gauze, and really and it doesn't take someone who, you don't have to have gone to medical school to know that's bad. That's clearly, they didn't think that was going to happen. They hoped that they would be able to keep that from happening. Blood belongs on the inside of the body. And David walks out through the hospital, and all the family members of the deceased stare at him. He's the only person who survived the crash, and yeah, again, it's such, you don't really need it to convey plot, because we were just told he's the only survivor, but it's a powerful shot. You have all these characters, and that's something, I think it's been said, but it really does, it bears repeating. Those one-takers, especially when there's a lot of people involved, a lot of people in front of the camera, those are hard work. If even one of those people break character, or like sneeze or something. You know, often it's always, I really hope they don't break character. They might do something that they can't help, you know, like sneeze or just, yeah, that would break and you have to set it all up again. But yeah, and you know, based on at least this movie, Shyamalan knows how to use these long takes. I think Lindsay Ellis talks about misusing long takes in that video she does, taking apart, as it clearly deserves to be based on that video, the what's it called? Yeah, that Gerard Butler, right, version of, and Patrick Wilson version of the Phantom of the Opera, not the Menace, and the Phantom Who Menaces the Opera, you know, by Joel Schumacher, which, yeah. But in this movie, and I also watched the deleted scenes, I would argue every single long take in the movie is used well and called for a long take, and the tracking shots. But I'll talk more about that. And I like the little detail that, you know, David and Audrey do start holding hands, but you know, within just a couple of seconds, they stop holding hands because it just, yeah, this was a powerful event, but they're not really there, you know, at this point in the movie yet, and at this point in the relationship anymore. They're not at that stage where that feels natural to them. And let's see. And Audrey briefly talks about, oh wait, sorry. I should really have proofread this particular voice text. I tried to proofread most of them, but this must have slipped by. Right, yeah. David talks about how, yeah, David and his wife briefly talk about how, you know, he's still going to move to New York, even though he didn't get this particular job. The idea is, you know, he's going to get another job. Like he says, not right away, but that is still the plan. And we have the memorial service with the names being read. And just briefly, the preacher in this scene is also in a deleted scene where David asks him, you know, for answers about this extraordinary event, and the priest says, I can't give you a miracle answer because I can't believe in that, right, you know, with this. And it's been a few days since I watched it, but I think he said that his nephew burned to death, and I forget, is that maybe the fire at the hotel that Elijah also caused? I forget, but that, you know, another mention of that, you know, puts that in the audience's mind, so that when you know, at the very end, when we're told about this, it's not the first time we hear about these disasters. And I thought it did really well. I did not know the twist when I first watched this movie, and I was really taken by surprise. You know, I did not expect that the disasters had been caused by Elijah, not at all. Now, and Elijah's left a note on David's windshield asking how many days of his life he's been sick, and he asks to check, you know, how many sick days he's had. And his boss, his boss is certain that it was he was trying to get a raise. So he just starts the conversation by saying, $40. $40 what? $40 more a week, that's the raise you're getting. I get it. 5 years working here, you've never taken a single sick day. Good way to make your point. That's, yeah. I do think, I haven't watched very many of his movies, but he is sometimes, claimed to be more or less humorless. And at least with this movie, I don't think, not, yeah, I would argue that there's not a lot of humor, and it is but it's like with Christopher Nolan and some of Zack Snyder's work, there are little, moments of humor, just, not as much as we're used to from other things, but, yeah. Now, let's see. They did an absolutely incredible job keeping the camera from being reflected in the television screen, and a very great slow zoom out from the reflection. And this is the second scene with Elijah, and we get a major hint at the villain role. He's using the name Mr. Glass. He's seated, as he will, later in the wheelchair after breaking his bones, and he's talking about feeling alienated. This doesn't happen to the other kids, and they make fun of me because of it. And his mother pushes him to go outside so he can retrieve his present, and tells him every time he goes outside, he'll get another comic book from his mother. And obviously, she intends this to be a way to make sure that he is going to, that he's not going to shut himself off from the outside, that he's going to keep going out there. But it does have the unintended effect of making him hyper-focused on the comic books, which, regardless, if she had handed him a huge pile at all at once, it might have had the same effect. But that is it's more or less the one thing he has, yeah. And really great monologue by Elijah about the comic cover original, and he's insulted when he hears that it's for a child. He knows that 4-year-old Jeb will not appreciate the brilliance of this work of art. And I would definitely say there are some of the, they are called artists for a reason. Some of the comic book artists are genuinely artists. They are capable of communicating a lot with very little, and creating really deeply compelling visuals. There's a lot. I'm not going to make excuses for the writing of Frank Miller, but the man knows how to draw something that really, he uses, what was it, negative space, I think it's called, incredibly well. And if you've watched the Sin City movies and you haven't read the comics, if you like the movies themselves, and I still love them both. I will admit that there are definitely problems with the second one. I think Rodriguez just sometimes, he gets these ideas that are not, maybe with that movie, I just recently rewatched and listened back to the commentary tracks on both El Mariachi and Desperado. And on Desperado, he says he doesn't necessarily rewatch an entire movie, he watches his favorite parts, the scenes. So he tries to make each scene really compelling. And on Desperado, I'd say it works. But then with something like the second, Sin City: A Dame to Kill For is what the movie's called. I think he maybe expects that people don't have the, what's it called? The attention span. So he keeps going back and forth between the different stories, and yeah, I've heard others say that it kind of kills the momentum that was building. Anyway, what I was getting to was, if you like those movies, you're gonna like the comic books, unless you absolutely despise reading comic books. But if your library has at least one of the issues, give it a chance. And on some of the visuals, Rodriguez decided to fill in with more detail, but he did maintain this sort of the strong contrasts. But in a lot of the visuals of the comic books, they're these, it's silhouette, and you don't really necessarily see the background, or you don't necessarily see detail. And I'm sure there are people who would look at that and say, he's too lazy to put in details. But it's incredibly effective. These are, 300 is another good example. And again, I love that movie, although I can't really defend the various messages. I've made videos on that. But some people who write and or draw comic books are really incredible. I think it's in the Watchmen abridged script, Rod Hilton, who in general, the more years pass, the more I realize I disagree with him. I'm really glad he let other people write on his site, because I like them a lot better than him now. But he created the site, and did he create the format, or did he borrow it from? I forget. But without him, they wouldn't be. So anyway, he says at the end of his Watchmen script that Alan Moore, he's like, this is terrible, and I forget whose voice says it. I'm not sure if it's I forget, but Rod Hilton, puts forth, you do comic books, you're not Monet or something like that. And it just makes me think, well, why do you think that Monet is great? That's because some people said, these paintings are great. And, but painting, that goes so back. That's, hundreds of years ago. So we assume that it's automatically better. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is, a painting has to convey a lot in a single one, but it doesn't necessarily have to tell a story. And every comic book, to be fair, it's not always a chronological story, but it conveys something, and it really is. I never did try to draw very much. I'm not good at drawing, but just read the books done by the people who did study it. Try to study it yourself. It's difficult to tell a story in a series of images. You don't have sound, and it's very difficult. And I think something that also really helps highlight it is, you can find comic books that are really not very good. Ask Linkar. There are a lot of ways you can get it wrong. So when you get it right, and when you get it right hundreds of, maybe thousands of times, look at Frank Miller, Jack Kirby, Alan. If I recall, Alan Moore writes, but he always has someone else do the art. I think so, but look at the people who did the art, you know. Am I gonna try? I guess I could try. I want to say Lynn Varley for V for Vendetta, and Watchmen, Dave Gibbon, something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not. Sometimes I'm absolutely terrible with names, but they did an absolutely amazing work, and I'm fairly certain I'm just gonna go with the man who drew the Watchmen. I'm fairly certain he's also the one who drew was it only the intro, the comic book intro of Beneath a Steel Sky, which is also just a great game. And I don't know if it's still free on GOG.com, but if it is, and you at all enjoy playing point-and-click adventures, I recommend trying it. But, you know, I don't know, if you end up having to pay money, you know, read reviews and make sure you're absolutely certain about. But, yeah. Now, back to my prepared notes. I love Samuel Jackson's subdued, subtle performance. Excuse me. There we go. In this entire movie, at no point does he shout or drop F-bombs when he gets angry. He gets passionate and at times raises his voice. But he's, you know, this is not Jules, I want to say. You know, this is not this is not Nick Fury. You know, yeah. It's probably my favorite performance of his that isn't Jules or Nick Fury or the shouty cat, you know, that is something he excels at, but here he really shows, and that's obviously something that Shyamalan realized, otherwise he wouldn't have cast the man, you know. Yeah, and I'm not sure I noted it anywhere else, but I really do appreciate Samuel Jackson's favorite color, or at least was when he made this, purple. And he's the one who chose that Elijah would wear purple, that would be his color. And that's also why his character has a purple lightsaber in the prequels. You know, he asked, you know, actually, yeah, didn't he actually downright, like, he talked him into it? It might be more than asked, that and it's like, I mean, I haven't seen very many lightsabers in Star Wars. If you want a lightsaber that's not blue, green, or red, you know, I mean, we didn't even get green until Return of the Jedi, did we? You know, you pretty much have to look beyond the movies, but, you know, wasn't the first time that I'd seen it. The Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight also has, there's a character in there that dual wields purple lightsabers. And I will be doing videos on that game. So, yeah, I quite appreciate that, you know, yeah. And Elijah talks about other disasters and how he waited for the words used, and at the end of the movie we are told, you know, or shown, he caused those disasters in addition to this one. There's the three disasters: the hotel fire, the airplane explosion, and the train derailing. And yeah, and that's, you know, he spent all that time just waiting for one of those disasters to have one sole survivor who was completely unhurt. And that's also, you know, not all, but some of the best villains. I'm not only talking comic books. Some of the best villains are the ones that are just really, really compelling. And when you imagine, you know, you can't really, obviously, what he did was freaking horrible. What he did was, but when you imagine what it must have been like, he says he spent a third of his life in hospital beds, you know, and all he had were these comic books So he studied them, and right before the very ending, Elijah's mother describes that the villain will have slightly bigger eyes, suggesting that his view on the world is slightly askew. And almost immediately after that, we realize how Elijah's perspective, just how far it goes. We realized that it was kind of an obsession, but we didn't realize just how far he would go for that obsession. But that's it, Elijah's view on reality, he's been too obsessed with how comic books must be. There must be some connection between comic books and the real, because comic books was the only input he got for so much of this time spent in hospital beds. Everyone who's ever been to a hospital, a really strong memory connected to it is how badly you want to leave. How whether you're the one who has to stay in the hospital for a while or you're visiting, you don't want to have to stay there for longer than absolutely necessary. It's just so painful to see all these, all these people who are stuck. And there was someone who said something, right, Audrey, I think, was the one who said that sometimes when someone spends a really long time in hospital, they start to see things they start to lose grip on reality. She's seen it before, she says, and she realizes that is what happened with Elijah. And that's he spent all this time, and that is something, if you're stuck on something, if you can't, then you are more likely to become obsessed with it. And so that is something, clearly Shyamalan, he does want us to understand, not sympathize with, ultimately not sympathize with, but understand Elijah. This is not something that just happened. This is a major, you might say, comparatively, Christopher Nolan's Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker, is clearly someone we're not meant to completely understand. There's not, there are things that he does over and over. There are certain reactions, he has, but we're not really meant to be able to look at him and say, I understand how he got into that situation, which with Elijah we are. When he looks at the playground and sees all these other kids just playing naturally, and here he is with a broken leg, it's hard. It's hard when a lot of your peers look at you and they think, and they can't, there's something about you that they can't get past. They hyper focus on this one thing. That is also something, if not for all these people around him saying, why are your bones so brittle, then he might not focus on it as much. But it's what keeps him in hospital, and every time a doctor comes into his room, that's what they're focused on. Every time he goes outside, he can't keep people from realizing that there is some, with the cane and the inside of his car, so yeah. And just to say now so I don't forget later, at the end he is comfortable being the villain, as long as he is someone, as long as his life has some meaning, as long as he's not a mistake. He's more comfortable with being the villain than he is with not knowing what he's, what his purpose is. And he's talking to David and points out he has the mildest version, type 1. And there's type 1, 2, 3, and 4. Type 4s don't last very long. And David is certain that Elijah is scamming him, and he's frustrated. As he says, he thought that he would get answers there. And then next thing David lowers the newspaper, and we see Joseph is holding him tightly, which is again a great and very comic book. Something in the frame will move to reveal something else. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to deal with this, cause it's gonna try to force a reboot if I don't. There, that should buy us 4 hours. There we go. And Audrey asks David if he's been with anyone since they started having problems. And she says, the fact that he walked away from the train crash, that's a big deal, and it feels like a second chance. And, David meets with Elijah again, this time at his job at the stadium. And he has this monologue and then ends it with saying, "Now all I need is your credit card number." That last part is a joke. And Elijah realizes David has a sense of when someone is carrying a weapon or the like. And I already mentioned, but really great detail that the inside of Elijah's car, I don't know what that material is called, but it's that extremely soft material. I don't know if it's exclusively for, but I have seen it on other, what's it called? Aids made for the handicapped to make their lives easier. And Elijah needs confirmation on whether the guy in the camo jacket had a gun. And really great detail on the smashing of the glass cane. We see the movie doesn't show the breaking of the bones really explicitly, which I think this was a PG-13, which always broadens you can get more people into a movie theater if your movie is PG-13. And it might also have been budgetary, because that is, that kind of thing takes, but the cane is complete, there's basically nothing left but small, glass splinters, basically. Splinters, maybe. The small chunks of glass, it doesn't break in half, it shatters. And that, that puts in our mind that his bones are shattering as well. And he broke numerous bones, but he does get to see David was right. a silver gun with a black grip tucked into his pants. And Joseph is so proud of David and really wants him to play football again, wants to help him lift weights. And, he, like, can I help you work out? And David says, sure, and then he's like, I can't play with you guys. I'm gonna work out with my dad, or I'm gonna help my dad work out, something like that, And yeah, it really means something, when someone you're closely related to has something like that, and you look up to your father. A lot of us do, and I'm not judging people who don't. And and then he's like, trying to. He's like, do you think you could beat Bruce Lee? And he's like, he keeps, well, what if he weren't allowed to kick and you were like really angry at him? And which I appreciate that he realizes, because I have completely lost count of how many times someone is like, well, how is he doing this thing that would require him to have high adrenaline when he couldn't do it before, when he didn't care as much? Because he cares. And when you care, when you're in a heightened state of emotions, your adrenaline surges, and that means you can push yourself further. So yeah, at least Joseph realized that. Maybe that's what that is. Maybe it's like, Shyamalan saying, because sometimes in comic books someone can do something extraordinary if they're like really, really angry or upset or the like. Now, and we realize he lifted 270 pounds, which is insane. And before lifting the heavy load, David tells Joseph, never do this yourself. And what do you do if something goes wrong? Get mom. And he's like, how much did you take off? I lied. I put more on. And, we put all, how much did you put on? All of it. What else can we put on? And they attached full, jugs, whatever they're called, of paint. That's, if you've ever helped paint somewhere and you maybe had to move a paint can, those things are heavy. Those things are really, really heavy. And they put 4 on, 2 on, either side. So and it's 350 pounds, which is, I appreciate that the movie genuinely does push it to that. That is more than what you would ever expect, a regular human being to be able to, no matter the adrenaline surge or the like. That's just not something you can, I'm a little nervous being here. I ask too many questions when I'm nervous. Good cover. And, I guess he requested her specifically knowing about David, and that does, that does make sense. If they're supposed to still be married, I'm pretty sure. So he has, if he has David's full name, which was probably in the newspaper, then, it's, and at this point, I think he already did talk to David about his wife. I'm not entirely sure if it was mentioned that her name was Audrey, but, I don't hate the game or the player. Not to get too political here, but she is right. Football hurts the players extremely badly, and as she points out, you're rewarded the more you hurt someone, And, he says, and he mentions David's name, and she's like, who told you that the man I'm married, that my husband's name is David? And Elijah again mentions the first 2 disasters, and Shyamalan does his director cameo. This one's not too bad. The Signs one's pretty bad, and yeah, I've only seen clips of the Happening one, but that one seems pretty bad. This one's not too bad, but then, there's not that much. I mean, he's basically just acting frustrated that he's being checked for drugs, and yeah. But, David now has some faith in his abilities, but then, turns out he doesn't have the drugs on him, and, no one really ever says it, but, I mean, basically the idea, he says, "I just got here." That was not some, the flash that David got of him, grabbing the drugs that were stashed. That didn't happen just now, that happened a while back. And, he's since sold those, or stashed them somewhere else or something, but, and that I also appreciate that, it's sort of this gradual thing of David, over the course of the movie, he accepts that he does have these abilities. Now, and, David goes to Joseph's school and is told, you did once get hurt, you nearly drowned in a pool, and, the kids still tell that story like it's a ghost story, and we don't discourage them from doing so because it helps keep them, so they don't forget that, it's dangerous. And Joseph won't accept David being an ordinary man, and they have to talk Joseph down from trying to shoot David to prove that he can't be hurt. And again, I didn't note this at the time, but if I recall, it was like the IMDb maybe I did put it in. Anyway, IMDb trivia states that was apparently something one of the Superman actors, or at least it's an urban legend, it might not be true, but, my back's acting up a little bit. Apparently a kid said, a kid didn't understand that he was an actor, that he wasn't actually Superman, and he wanted to shoot him to see the bullet bounce off. And apparently, according to the urban legend, the actor also talked him down by saying the bullet might ricochet and hurt someone. And, David is, tells him, I won't get hurt, but I'll leave for New York. And, it really sucks when your dad uses that against you. And Elijah gets frustrated and sulks in a comic book store and, keeps knocking over comics, but then, right as the guy is calling the cops, he wants to buy this specific issue, and, that's when he realizes water is David's kryptonite. And David and Audrey go on a date and talk about when they started to have trouble. And someone called from New York. They want to hire David, but he would have to move there. Which is also, it's a nice little element to keep, at the start. He went to New York to have an, face-to-face, in-person, what's it called? Interview. Hiring interview, job interview, that's it. It's right there, an interview to get a job interview. Lose the words there for a second. Sorry, I cannot mimic Ultron's laugh, not quite. And, right, he went to a job interview in New York, taking the train there, even though, that would mean he would be moving to New York, away from Philadelphia, I want to say, is where the movie is set otherwise. And, then they talk about, and he's like, okay, I didn't get the job, but I am still moving there, just not right away. So saying that the fact that he didn't get this particular job doesn't change, the status quo. Yeah, he's still moving. That's, there. Yeah, that they reached that conclusion that it would be better for them to, and then here, now you have to make the decision. Are you going to take that job and move there, or, because at this point, things are looking a little better for them. And Elijah left a phone message and, points out water is David's kryptonite. And I appreciate that it actually goes there and says that and uses that. Everyone who's ever heard the word kryptonite knows Superman's weakness, kryptonite. But a lot of people are unwilling to use it because it's a comic book thing. And, when this movie was made, comic books were a niche. It was not like... this came out before the first Raimi Spider-Man movie, which was when, movies really started to dive deep back into, we're going to wear the costume, we're going to have the superpowers, we're going to have the supervillains and all this, Did this hit theaters before or after the first X-Men movie? When they were making it, in the marketing campaign and such, at the time, the first X-Men movie had not hit theaters and really, the first Blade movie, and certainly there's some comic book inspiration in The Matrix, which, The Matrix had come out before this did, but a lot of people probably don't think of The Matrix as having much of anything to do with comic books or anime, and And Blade, there are probably a lot of people who don't know that has anything to do with comic books. It's kind of a concept that you would think, oh yeah, comic book, but it could be like, you have movies that have concepts that, go in so anyway. And David goes to examine the remains of the crashed train, and a flashback to the car accident. He tears one of the doors off in order to get Audrey out of the car. And, at this point we already do basically realize, he didn't actually get hurt. He wanted an excuse. This is why he doesn't play football anymore. Because if he told Audrey, for you, I'm going to give up football, that's a big one. That's, then she might feel responsible for his happiness for the rest of their lives. She might feel that every time he's upset, deep down, it's because he misses football. So, like Elijah says, it was a convenient excuse. But, the thing with the tearing the door off, I figure that basically he just, afterwards, he kind of said to himself, that didn't really happen. It was like, adrenaline rush, and I was doing something important, and then, when I think back to it, it seems like superhuman, but it wasn't. It was just, and a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable to be out of the ordinary, even if you might sometimes feel like, that would be cool or something, but he didn't want to be out of the ordinary. And, certainly if he was going to be with Audrey and she doesn't want a football player, the idea of him going out and using his strength as a yeah, you know, that might put her off. And Elijah tells David to go to a public place, and you know, it's okay to be afraid because this part will be like real life. I appreciate that David doesn't find the criminal immediately. First he finds some that he doesn't go after, and you know, yeah, I mean, there's the you know, the woman who stole jewelry from a store. I have to admit, my first thought was, don't they have like security cameras that would notice? I don't know. Maybe they didn't back then. I don't know. And you know, there's that guy who rapes the unconscious girl. I appreciate that we didn't have to see that. The implication is there, and we don't. Yeah. The moment that he closes the door, we know what he's going to do. And that is kind of like, he says, I think you had too much to drink, and then he goes towards the door. And he has a chance. He could choose to leave the room and close the door, and you know, we wouldn't necessarily see it, but he could, you know, go and tell somebody, hey, she's, you know, we need to watch her because so nobody takes advantage of her or does something to her. And yeah, with his, you know, I mean, we wouldn't be seeing it if he hadn't done something wrong. David wouldn't have sensed it if there wasn't something wrong, but still. And yeah, and you know, David goes to the house and he realizes both children, and the man in orange pushes him over the ledge and he lands in the pool. And I really like how, you know, they could easily have just have him just immediately sink, like yeah, like a stone or something, but instead he lands on the pool covering, or what it's called, you know, and you know, I've heard that, you know, pool maintenance is like, you know, you can't half-ass that stuff. You can't think of it as a kitchen appliance. You gotta know all this aquatic science. But yeah, he lands on the pool cover and slowly starts to sink. And he, yeah, very, very nicely done, and very tense as he almost drowns. And the kids save him, which is, you know, obviously there's the counter argument that, you know, moral acts don't have to be validated. They, you know, you do it because it's the right thing to do, but nevertheless, it does communicate, you know, he saved someone and they save him back. And I really, I love the shot of, like, you've got the curtains blowing in the wind and in the foreground, and, you know, David walking in the background, and he walks all the way up, you know, to the curtains, and then we realize that the man in orange is there and attacks him. And yeah, just really, really, yeah, again, comic book framing and the whole. And I mean, you could maybe make an argument that as someone who works in security, he should know not to just so blindly turn his back to, you know, even if, yeah, you know, him being thrown off the balcony there, you know, well, it's only dangerous for him because there's water down there, but I guess that's it, isn't it? He didn't realize there was a pool down there until it was too late. That's it. He was like, it's fine for me to go onto this balcony because if he knocks me off, I'll get right back up. Fair enough. And he fights the man in orange, and the man in orange throws him against the walls, and sometimes the wall, like, cracks, and, like, that's very nicely done. And I realize from a production standpoint, it's not difficult to do, you know. Excuse me, you guys, you gotta rehearse it so that he hits him against the right of the walls, and those walls are made from breakable material. I realize that. but it's a really great way to show, this guy, again, we're talking adrenaline, he's fearing for his life, so he smacks David into the wall at like this should basically, I don't know if it would break his back, but like hurt like crazy. And I mean, he doesn't shrug it off, because if he shrugged, he would be letting go of the guy. But you get what I mean. And the mother of the 2 children was dead when David freed her, which also means that, when the man in orange was like, was he like spitting or dribbling, from the bottle can, sorry. I assume that's beer or something. And, he wasn't just like, he wasn't, abusing, I guess, yeah, abusing a kidnapped victim. No, he was desecrating a corpse. Is desecration too? Again, if desecration is like a 10, I mean something's like at a 2. But that's the direction. I mean, he's literally standing there, pouring liquid on a corpse. That's, yeah. Again, not saying the other thing would be right either, but yeah. And I quite appreciate the reveal. When David unties her, her body just slumps over. Up until that point, we thought that she was maybe unconscious. And David carries Audrey up the steps, and he said he had a bad dream, and she says, "It's over now." I really like the relationship between the 2 of them. There's a lot to it. It could very easily have been, not very, yeah. There's a deleted scene where apparently, when talking about David, she claimed that he was a lawyer and that they were only like dating. And yeah, that's, pretty much spells that she's ashamed of him and she doesn't think the marriage will work out. Now, let's see. And that's also earlier when after David comes back from the train, he's moving up the stairs, and says, "I'm still moving to New York, just maybe not right away." And she says good night, and he continues going up there, and she stays down there, which, again, no, I don't think I'm reading too much into it. That means they're sleeping not only in separate beds, but on separate floors. And then when he carries her up there, that's them sleeping in the same bed again. And it's a romantic thing to do. If you're strong enough to carry your significant other, that's, yeah, it's and by that point he knows for a fact that he's like, he could carry her and Joseph and just, maybe a couple of, yeah, if he needed to transport like several gallons of milk as well, maybe. And Audrey says, if Elijah Price shows up again, they should call the police. And she's not looking at them. She's going, okay. And after a few seconds, I'm okay. And David slides over the newspaper. Again, she's got her back turned. She's like doing dishes, I think. David slides over the newspaper with the headline that this hero saves 2 children. And did the kids not give an accurate enough description? Because they must have seen his face, but the image drawn really doesn't show his face. Maybe it's artistic license, because it does look very comic book-y, the drawing from their description in the newspaper, or maybe they claim that they didn't see his face properly. You know, they realized that yeah, it might be, maybe he even explained that to them. We don't see every second that they spend together. Yeah, maybe he explained he needs them to keep that secret, so they can just claim, they never saw his face. They saw his eyes. And David slides over the newspaper. Joseph reads it, realizing his father saved the two children, and they agree that they won't tell Audrey. And the exhibition is held, which tells us that 2 weeks have passed since the start of the movie. And I may have already kind of said, but I really love what Elijah's mother says about villains. Both the eyes askew and the soldier type villain and the mastermind villain, because we just saw him fight the soldier, and now he goes over to to realize that Elijah's the mastermind, and David realizes Elijah caused those disasters. And next section, notes taken before watching. Yeah, that's gonna have to do. Now, the movie, or at least the version I watched, was an hour and 42 minutes and 13 seconds with credits, and about an hour and 38 and a half minutes without. Now, I don't know, I guess you could argue that I should have said this earlier, but the only other M. Night Shyamalan movie I've watched is Signs, and that one really put me off. And I think when I just heard that there was might be aliens in this movie, and there's like a twist, and back then I didn't realize how problematic Mel Gibson is. Yeah, the idea appealed to me. I like Joaquin Phoenix. I don't mind the Culkin kids. But yeah, that movie is just not very good. I quite like... It's been a while since I watched the entire review. I meant to before reviewing this, but... Nostalgia Critic's review of the movie, the bit where basically he translates what the aliens must be saying as they struggle to get past the wood. I quite like that. I really think that scene deserves that. I do not think he did it. That was not a good movie. I might watch Sixth Sense at some point. I do, of course, know the twist. And I do think, it's kind of a cool twist, And in this, I like his style, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily sure that I'm that interested in his other films. I mean, The Happening, other than those two words put together, to me, that means like a hippie concert or something. That's what a happening is in my mind. I don't know why he didn't call it The Event. I guess that also can have the concept. No, Event is better, in my opinion. The Happening is, anyway. And just, I guess I shouldn't give away what it turns out to be in that movie, but even before I knew exactly what was going on, just that movie, this, weird aerial attack that makes people commit suicide in complex ways. That doesn't really... I don't care if I'd never watched that movie. And After Earth, which, especially makes a huge mistake in making Will Smith not be charming. And let's see, what else? yeah, devil. I'm sorry. I've always thought it was. I don't like those ideas when it's like, ooh, the devil isn't. Well, if he's the devil, why isn't he trying to like conquer Earth? Why does he care about what happens to a single elevator of people? It's just that's never made any sense to me. I get that it's difficult to make a movie where like, it's for one thing big budget, and it's also just it's a hard sell. That's why the first Exorcist movie focuses on one girl, and the second Exorcist movie is not as fondly remembered because that does go in much more in that direction. But yeah, I feel like didn't Warlock 2 have sort of at least a hint that I could watch the Warlock movies again if I find them. Yeah. I did, unfortunately, I watched the second one before the first one. They were both on TV, and I think about a week apart. And back then, for some reason, maybe they still do, they showed movies out of order. They also showed the second Addams Family movie before the first one. I mean, look at the years they were released. Look at it's pretty obvious that, the second one, they have a baby. Do you not wonder where that baby is? Why it's not even referenced in the other movie? Yeah, anyway. Right, let's see, other Shyamalan movies. I have no interest in The Last Airbender. I don't really have much of an interest in anime and manga. The only reason I'm watching Alita is because of two names, Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron. If not, I probably wouldn't watch that movie, even though, I like the cast. I guess that's basically... Has he made other movies? There might be other movies, but not super interested in his other work. Anything he makes related to this, I'll watch. And I really appreciate that this is not only a comic book movie, but also about comics and the impact they can have on people. And it isn't judging people for loving comic books. The movie itself and the director himself clearly does love comic books. There's no way this movie came out of people who didn't love comic books. Especially not the, people who really hated them. And I don't, maybe at some point I'd watch that. What's it called? Birdman? I have a hard time. The director apparently said that comic book movies are like cancer to the movie industry or something like that. And just, maybe don't ever say that about anything ever. Like, cancer is cancer. Nothing else is like cancer. Can we get to that? I don't know. Maybe that's absolutely crazy. If you really can't stand comic book movies, maybe don't make a movie about them. I don't know. Anyway, that's not the only reason I haven't watched that movie. Yeah. Now, the text at the ending of this does feel studio mandated, but I mean, I guess the institution he ends up at is the one in the trailer for Glass, or maybe he was moved into that one in that movie. In at least one of the trailers, it's like, cheer up now, you've got company, or you have some visitors, something, But yeah, this movie was probably meant to have at least one sequel, and I remember seeing on the IMDb boards back when those were a thing, someone theorizing this was probably supposed to be a trilogy, and in the third one, David would fight Elijah, and seems like that's what's gonna happen. So yeah. I'm really glad it's getting a sequel, almost 20 years later, and yeah, that's what happens today. Movies that came out forever ago get sequels, comic books get adapted, and like, you know, stuff that's like already been somewhat popular here and there, other material there gets adapted. You know, the Hobbit. Yeah, you know, back when he made the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he had to really fight. No, look, 3 movies, 3 hours each. That's the way this story is going to work best. You know, today it's like, how many movies do you want? 3? Come on, don't say only 2. Gotta make 3. You know, and yeah, I think it should have been 2. But anyway, yeah, I'm really glad that, you know, and apparently the some of the stuff that Shyamalan discarded in writing this, you know, he was like, I don't know about this other stuff, you know, maybe, you know, I don't think for this movie at least, you know, some of it has been put in, you know, yeah, the movie that exists in the same universe as this one. And as already mentioned, I haven't yet watched that one, but I will watch and do a video on it, you know, not review, but thoughts like this, before watching Glass. And Glass, I am probably gonna go, you know, premiere or very close to the premiere. Now, I've already mentioned some comic book framing. Yeah, one example of that is, like, you know, these scenes where the camera will gradually move close to the person talking. I realize this isn't unique to this movie or to comic books, excuse me, but it does work really well here, and it is something that is in a number of comic books. You know, the camera will show a lot of the surrounding area rather than just, you know, static shot on the people and the, yeah, you know, it will specifically move over the, yeah. Now, and I mentioned I love the twist ending, the handshake that tells Bruce Glass is the villain. And the DVD has 27.5 minutes of deleted scenes with video introductions by M. Night Shyamalan. And it's one of those, like, he's a little bit shy on camera. Like, you know, clearly the man knows what he wants when he's directing, but like a lot of other people who are used to being behind the camera, he's not super comfortable being in front of the camera. But, you know, he does get the, you know, he makes good introductions to it. And it's one of those things, I find it frustrating when you watch deleted scenes and you're like, why isn't this in the movie? This should be in the movie. I really like when, yeah, video, you know, introduction or, you know, commentary track or something explaining this is why this is not in the movie. Now, right. And there's a 13-minute and 44-second making of Unbreakable, and that one I actually have some notes on. They point out that they wanted a sense of normalcy in the house and the lives of the characters before the realization of the powers. I did all, yeah, just briefly, I've read someone suggesting that basically the realism of this world flies in the face of the superpowers that you then realize. You know, there's no way to, you know, you can't get around that David Dunn is inhumanly strong. He, you know, kryptonite is his only water, and he, when he touches someone, he, if they've done something, if they've broken the law or the like, he gets a brief vision of that. And that's also something I briefly wanted to, you know, you see the guy who rapes the unconscious girl, and then you see he's, you know, with his family, and it's this, you know, if they only knew what he does when they aren't looking. And the yeah, the yeah, right. There, you know, no matter what, you cannot get around that David Dunn, as presented in this movie, has powers that go beyond what is humanly possible. And some have said, you know, the rest of the world seems so realistic. I don't think that's a problem. It's just, I mean, at the end of the day, by the end of this movie, we don't know how many people there are who have powers and who just haven't realized it yet. And a lot of comic book universes they follow the laws of physics. They are realistic in a lot of aspects. So yeah, I don't think it's a problem. The fact that David has never before realized that he doesn't get hurt, I mean, maybe it would have been less, maybe it would have been more credible if if he realized it as a teenager. But that's maybe not the movie that, you know, Shyamalan wanted to make. You know, he wanted Bruce Willis again. He wanted a man in his 40s, you know. And yeah, I think an argument could be made that it would be more realistic if he realized as a teenager, when, like, yeah, you know, that a lot of teenagers get physically hurt doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing. And yeah, I mean, it is a bit, but that I think ultimately I don't think it's a big problem for the movie. I don't think it breaks, pun not intended, the movie. I think it works. It's just that some people are bothered by that, and you're not wrong. You know, it's just as with a lot of things with comic books, you know, some people are going to go for it and some people are going to say no, that's just no. And yeah, you know, that is what, you know, there are a lot of comic books that have ideas that are really hard that are very far from reality. And yeah, some people, you know, for some people that's what they were looking for. For others, it's a, you know, it's something that they can't, you know. Now, you know, you might say that, you know, to me, a lot of things, that's where my taste in fiction begins, where to others, that's where their tolerance ends. Now, right, and back to my notes, stuff they said in the making of. David Dunn's world is a warm world, and the Elijah world is an unfeeling world. And David wears mostly shapeless clothes. And the raincoat cape becomes more dramatic as you go through the scene when he rescues the children. They didn't want to use any stock sound library sounds. When Elijah falls down the stairs, we only hear him falling when we see him falling. There is silence when we see the stairs themselves, and we have these horrible sounds of bones breaking, and between the sounds of him falling, yeah, you know, yeah, between the sounds of him falling and relative silence, you have these horrible sounds of bones breaking. Yeah, the washing machine is finishing up the load. As far as I recall, it's not that loud for the camera, but because I closed both doors. And they talk about reflections, and yeah, and the story exists on two levels: a realistic story about a man who's a security guard and a man who's realizing he's a superhero. And M. Night Shyamalan says that he likes Twilight, he wants to make feature-length Twilight Zone episodes. And yeah, that perfectly explains the big twist at the end of his films. And I don't have a problem with that as long as the film in general is good and the twist is a strong twist, and that the movie wasn't. I don't think you should really build a movie around a twist. I think that ideally there's more meat on the bone before a twist by itself is just something unexpected. A twist isn't good just by being a twist. You have to have a good twist. And watched the Film Brain review of The Happening and read the various abridged scripts of the other movies that he's done. And unlike some other M. Night Shyamalan films, in this one the protagonists do drive the plot. It doesn't just happen without regardless of their involvement. And this was back when M. Night Shyamalan was putting straight white men in the lead who has problems, maybe even a crisis, with their wife, who in some of these movies is dead by the time the movie starts. I mean, he did eventually stop that, right? Again, haven't watched enough of, I don't know enough about the new ones to say for sure. Now, off-topic stuff, I rewatched Kinsey, a very good film that I do think could have been even better, about an incredibly important topic. Something I love about watching that is that when Liam Neeson is commanding his colleagues to pull it together, he uses the exact same voice as when threatening his enemies in Darkman. Which is also, I find him way scarier as Darkman than in the Taken movies. And Renegade Cut recently uploaded a video where he talks about the idea of It's a Wonderful Life being communist propaganda. And one of the top YouTube comments when I watched was, "Every time a bell rings, a unionized worker gets a lunch break," which is excellent. Excellent comment. And I absolutely love part 1 of 4 of Renegade Cut, talking about the fan base of the DCEU. He didn't mention Aquaman. He said that he was excited about Shazam, but he didn't mention Aquaman at all. I don't know if he will do a video on that, but I would like to hear him talk about the movie. Even if it doesn't get to be in that series, maybe he was so close to completing it when, Aquaman here came out like a week ago, but in the US, I guess it was like yesterday, so yeah, I could completely understand if he was just so close to completing it, but maybe he won't like it. I love it, but maybe he won't. I would still like to hear his thoughts on it, because if nothing else, the mistakes that it makes, and I'm going to admit that it makes mistakes. The mistakes it makes are very unlike the mistakes the other movies have made. So I would like to hear him go into that. And Dan Olsen, I'd also like to hear. Yeah. And that was another movie. Yeah, like I mentioned, I think I ended up giving it an 8. I talked about I was an 8 or a 9 out of 10. And again, personal enjoyment, it's a 10. Now, once they fix the bugs, I am definitely getting my hands on an Apple Wish Prince and a Garth XI, no matter what it ends up being able to do. And finally, we have the section called IMDb, Wikipedia, and critics' sites. And now, starting with some IMDb stuff. The film derived from the first third of the original script. M. Night Shyamalan felt no connection to the last 2/3 of the text and decided to discard them. And I have to wonder if those last 2/3 are what became that one movie that's in the same universe as this and Glass, or if he changed a bunch. And yeah, the film is shot as a series of long, very long, by Hollywood standards, tracking shots, often with stark shadows or unusual camera angles to mimic the storyboard flow of a comic book. And M. Night Shyamalan has said that the only way he'll make a third Unbreakable movie is if he can come up with an idea for a movie that can also stand on its own. Does that mean that the Glass is the second Unbreakable movie, or was this? See, I wish that they would put these notes in, like, that they would say when chronologically they were. I mean, did he say that while making Glass, or did he say it after making that other movie that, yeah. And Elijah Price's distinctive hairstyle was based on Civil War era activist Frederick Douglass, whose last name coincidentally contains the word glass. David's green raincoat makes a very striking resemblance to the DC Comics character the Spectre, an immortal being tasked with punishing the wicked. Like David, he wears a green hood that obscures his face. When David and his son first meet Elijah, there's a protracted shot when the son has gone out of the room, when the lampshade on the desk is perfectly positioned behind David's head and looks like an aura or a halo. Now, in the train scene at the beginning of the movie, a ticking clock noise can be heard. This ticking clock stops just before the train accelerates and loses control. We see 4 characters die on screen and hear about a total of 513 other off-screen deaths. David often wears a hooded raincoat, resembling the cape and hood costumes of many traditional superhero characters. Now, and I think this is where we move into Wikipedia stuff. The movie's a deconstruction of the superhero genre, and many regard it as one of Shyamalan's best films and one of the best superhero films. In 2011, Time listed it as one of the top 10 superhero films of all time, ranking number 4. And Quentin Tarantino included it in his top 20 films released since 1992. Now, Shyamalan and cinematographer Eduardo Serra chose several camera angles to simulate the look of a comic book panel. Various visual and narrative motifs were also applied. Several scenes relating to Mr. Glass, a character involved Glass. As a newborn, he's primarily seen reflected in mirrors. As a young child, he's seen reflected in a blank TV screen. When he leaves his calling card on the windshield of David Dunn's car, he's reflected in a glass frame. His art gallery. Jackson requests his walking stick be made of glass to make his character more menacing. Excuse me, and using purple as Mr. Glass's color to David Dunn's green was also Jackson's idea. And that, again, that makes a lot of sense. You know, the Joker wears purple and green, and you have other characters where, yeah, you know, those two colors are, yeah, you know, they stand out from each other. You know, yeah, for those who don't know, I find it an interesting little fact. One of the reasons that comic book characters, especially in, like, you know, the 40s and 60s and such, the reason they have colorful costumes is so that you can recognize them at a glance. You know, the idea is that a kid who might buy a comic book, who might be attracted to a comic book, can, like, you know, just look casually over what, you know, there might be 20 comic books in you know, in a small area. So the one that has, like, you know, if he recognizes a character that he likes, or if he sees a costume that grabs his attention, that might be the one comic he walks away with, you know, because mom doesn't want to buy 20 comic books. So, you know, and also when you have a massive battle, you know, Infinity War, there are comic books that have battles that big with that many characters, sometimes more characters than that. Those battles, either it's relatively close, or if it's like really zoomed out, so, you know, the character's this small, it's real good for him to be, you know, that's why the Hulk is a this strong green. You know, there are comics where he's gray and he's not as recognizable there. You know, but the green, you know, that's actually another example. His skin is green, but his pants are purple. You know, it's yeah, it creates a contrast. Now, in 2009, filmmaker Quentin Tarantino praised Unbreakable and included on his top list of the top 20 films released since 1992, the year he became a director. He praised the film as a brilliant retelling of the Superman mythology and said it contains what he considers to be Bruce Willis' best performance, and also criticized the way the film was marketed upon release, which, yeah, I don't think I put that anywhere, but that was also something that Shyamalan pointed out. He was frustrated that they didn't, you know, they didn't market it as a comic book movie because they were, you know, it was niche at the time. Instead, they marketed more like a, you know, a psychological thriller, like The Sixth Sense. You know, they were like, this made bank, so maybe if we just, but that's not what the movie is, you know. Even not having watched that movie, just having watched clips and reading reviews and such, clearly the movies are very different movies, you know. It's just because it has this sort of somber and like gradual, not really like fast-paced, more deliberate flow. And Bruce Willis is the protagonist. He has a kid and he has some problems with his wife, you know. And the kid is really like really focused on you know, Bruce Willis. It doesn't mean it's the same movie. It's you know, there are some similarities, sure, but yeah. And right, Quentin Tarantino, you know, criticized the way the film was marketed upon release, stating he felt that it would have been far more effective if the film's advertising simply posed the question of, what if Superman was here on Earth and didn't know he was Superman? And that's, yeah. And in 2011, Time ranked it as, yeah, that's, anyway, some of these are doubles. Right, you know, Time described it as one of the best superhero origin stories, as a relatively quiet, subtle, and realistic look at the pressures that come with being a superhero. And The Hollywood Reporter, in 2018, The Hollywood Reporter called it a deconstruction of the American superhero or villain complex that is more prescient than ever. And, which, yeah, you know, I mean, when I watched it back then, I didn't have any idea in 2008 how big comic book movies were going to get, but and certainly there are things that have surprised me about some of the adaptations. In the MCU, mostly positive surprises. But yeah, you know, a lot of what the movie said back then, I was like, this isn't that surprising to me, but I'm glad someone's putting words to it and communicating it. You know, I don't expect everyone to read, you know, I don't know, 150 comic books like I did when I was younger. You know, so I'm glad that that same, you know, the interesting aspects of it, even if you don't want to read comic books, I think it's worth just looking at some of the aspects of it. You know, I watch almost no musicals, but I still find it interesting when Lindsay Ellis talks about musicals, which is good because she talks about a lot of musicals. Much love. Yeah, you know, I'm if I one day do a video and I talk about how I watched a version of the Phantom of the Opera, it's possible that I've like made a friend or I'm dating someone who's super into that. But otherwise, I may well have been, you know, replaced with a Skrull. I think that's how you might know. That is no longer me. I am really not into, yeah. But there are some musicals that I do quite like. Tim Burton's the Demon Barber of Wall Street. I forget the name right now. And I feel like there's something else, but I forget. Now, the tomato meter, when I last checked, which was yesterday sometime, has it a 69%, with an average rating of 6.3 out of 10, with 163 reviews and 112 of them being fresh. Now, the consensus is, with a weaker ending, Unbreakable is not as good as The Sixth Sense. However, it is a quietly suspenseful film that intrigues and engages, taking the audience through unpredictable twists and turns along the way. And the audience score is 77% liked it, with an average rating of 3.4 out of 5, and 117. Yeah. Don't know how that, yeah, whatever. Ratings. I think part of it is that the ending has the studio mandated text that I feel like if, I don't know, I mean, I get why they maybe didn't make another movie about this back then, and I don't blame him for, I mean, he doesn't really do many sequels. Is this the first time? This might be the first time, actually, that he's done sequels or a shared universe. So it's not, yeah, and I do get that, like, the twist of The Sixth Sense is like shattering, where in this it's, yeah, I'm not sure I'd necessarily say it's a weaker, I don't personally feel that it's, I find that it's deeply compelling, but yeah, with The Sixth Sense, that was one of the first times that this sort of thing had been done really, really well, and since, like, Hitchcock could make a movie that, like, built up to a brilliant twist. Psycho still is amazing, and yeah, Vertigo, but there are others. It's been too long since I watched Hitchcock, but yeah, after Hitchcock passed, rest in peace, there was a while where, sure, movies were being made that had twists, but they weren't necessarily that good. And then along comes Shyamalan, and yeah, The Sixth Sense was a big surprise. It's also, if I do watch it, I will try to gauge my expectations from that people didn't expect it. That's sometimes some movies, when if you watch them for the first time, excuse me, much later, long after they came out, you have to keep that in mind. But that is part of it is that the ending here does feel like there could be more, and that's also part of it, was that he created a 3-act, and then he was like, I care mainly about the first, so he built the entire movie around that. And that's also something, when the movie ends, it does kind of feel like maybe there should be more, and that's, yeah, it's just the beginning. It doesn't quite feel like a complete story, and yeah, I'm not entirely sure if he expected that he would never make another, or if he did. Yeah. Now, let's see. Okay, so I've spent an hour 47, so about as long as the movie itself is. And I am looking at 44 pages, a Word document of reviews, some by critics and some by users on, I think, only Metacritic. I used to read reviews on Rotten Tomatoes by users, but then, you know, you look up something and it's like a pretty intensely high number of pages of user reviews, and it kind of feels like, okay, maybe not, maybe I won't. So I'm not sure how many of these I'm going to go through, and I'll try not to have too much dead air from reading. Let's see. Yes, and as usual, I recommend you read reviews on your own as well. Let's see. I can't tell what this guy gave it, but yeah. By watching this masterpiece, you'll realize that not all movies of this genre need to be driven mostly by action, spectacle, and one-liners, and that is 100% accurate. And writer-director M. Night Shyamalan's penchant for a deliberate narrative is certainly in full effect with Unbreakable. Let's see. And this review was from 2010. Sequel talk often sparks because this unconventionally contemplative, I think that's it. Yeah, the emphasis. Comic book film is M. Night Shyamalan's own, I know what the word means, I just forget exactly how the emphasis goes. Only idea worth continuing, a patient, downbeat, and thrillingly unpredictable drama that still stands today as Shyamalan's visionary masterpiece. And that is something I really hope, when I go watch Glass, and when I watch the other movie in this universe, I really hope that Shyamalan didn't complete. I've heard people say that the other one in this shared universe, is evidence that he can still do some good, but you know, when you, it kind of seemed, you know, after this he made Signs, and Signs was not very good. Then The Village, which really started, and then was it The Happening? No, then The Lady in the Water, which, wow! I once read someone try to explain the mythology of that without really saying what you see in the movie, and just reading that, I get why he thought that was interesting mythology, but why he would think that he could put it in a movie and direct it in his style, and somehow, yeah, I don't, I mean, like, just because you have an idea that you think is kind of cool doesn't mean you have to direct the movie yourself. You know, some people are like, you know what, this would be cool for this, you know, this person I know who also, you know, does movie. Yeah, wasn't that like, I mean, James Cameron wrote but didn't direct Strange Times or whatever it's called, you know. I remember that. It's a pretty good movie. It's been, I guess, over a decade since I watched that, and I'm not sure I watched it more than once. Let's see. Yeah, you know, Catherine Bigelow, I want to say, directed that. And yeah, you know, I don't know if, I mean, I could see Cameron directing it himself, but, you know, and Cameron's not directing Alita. He's, you know, he gives that to Robert Rodriguez. So, yeah. Now, let's see. M. Night Shyamalan's only idea worth continuing, I don't know, I mean, aren't a lot of the other ones just so based on the twist that there's not really anywhere to go after that? You know, that's one big thing in this. The twist specifically makes you think that, you know, where's the next movie in this series, you know? And, yeah. a superhero origin story for an audience that appreciates human stories. Let's see. Some say that the melodrama doesn't really work. A little too pretentious, but still good. Maybe. Okay, maybe. But I still love it. I don't know what would be required to take this from kind of a personal enjoyment down from a 10 out of 10 for me. That, yeah. And Shyamalan takes us in close, picking up sad and angry whispers. His people almost never raise their voices. Excuse me. With Unbreakable, Mr. Shyamalan establishes himself as a distinctive auteur with a very personal style. He is one of the only. What's his name? Kyle, something of the Brows Held High. Didn't he say that auteur films were dying? Or not coming back, having already died? Something. Excuse me. And remarkable, dark, and surprising. Unbreakable is an extraordinarily quiet movie. Impatient audience members will probably give up on the movie early and they'll miss out. That is definitely, I get why. If you watch this movie and you're like, it's taking too long to get to where it's going. Again, I don't think so. Excuse me. But I get why you might think so, especially if you don't know. I mean, if I hadn't watched the movie yet and someone was trying to sell me on it knowing that I might not watch it through the end, which would probably mean that I was like, that would be a bizarro version of me or someone who didn't know me very well, because I'm very unlikely to stop watching a movie that I've started watching. Extremely unlikely. But if that were the case, and they told me that by the ending, this regular guy would have realized that he has powers like a superhero, and you have this kind of Lex Luthor manipulative mastermind villain, that would completely sell me on it. Just, yeah. And Shyamalan has a way to go before ascending to the level of Alfred Hitchcock, the uncontested master of psychological suspense, but he clearly wants to do so. And this might have made an interesting episode of The X-Files. I could see how that, maybe. Well, I haven't watched X-Files, but I get what, I know more or less what it's like, yeah. But it fails as a full-length movie. I don't quite agree with that last part, but I mean, I could see how an argument could be made that the movie, there needed to be more, that by the end the movie hasn't moved enough, that the characters haven't gone through as much as, yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't really agree, but I understand people who say so. And yeah, this I get. Again, I don't quite agree with this, but I get where he's coming from. And definitely, yeah, he talks about the third and final act being very different from the first two, and that is, I can understand seeing that as a problem. You know, that, yeah. Or as thinking, you know, too little too late, or the like. A depressing definitive case of a film that experiences in its third and final act what one could either call, charitably, a total loss of its convictions, or, less charitably, a total brain aneurysm. I also appreciate that's an image. That's nice, evocative, yeah. The work of a movie-savvy intelligence who understands exactly what he's doing. And an oddly muted comic book fable that treads a fine line between ridiculous and profound. Again, I don't really agree, but that's... It's nice and, you know, expressed well. Again, the director uses Bruce Willis as his leading man. Again, he draws from the action star icon an intense, low-key performance that is all about stillness and silent pain. And in the end, you leave the theater satisfied and looking for more. An impressive and original bit of storytelling. A loving ode to everything that a comic book is about, both inside and out. Less spooky than it is moody, less scary than it is absorbing. Instead of punctuating his film with shocks, Shyamalan challenges moviegoers to pay attention and rewards them with a rich, contemplative tale. Again, very well put. Yeah, here's a reviewer who talks about the kid pointing a gun at his father. I mean, I could understand those who say that we should have seen, if he's in an emotional place where he's willing to do that, then we should have seen more examples of him being, somewhat disturbed, and the other characters should make sure to get him into therapy. It'll be a while before I do another video on it. Before watching the new Halloween movie, I rewatched all the Halloween movies leading up to it, and I haven't watched Halloween 6 very many times, but there's this kid, regardless of whether you've watched that movie or not, there's a kid in it who at times seems very disturbed, but at all other times, the characters around him act as if he's not doing something disturbing. And that's just, the thing is that the movie doesn't really have room for scenes of them going over what's bothering him. We really need to have a close eye on him. It's, the movie is so packed with so many things, but you can't just have that in there in a movie that otherwise more or less takes place in the real world. Like, if, let's say that at some point, Brazil, some of the children in that movie are clearly messed up, and you're like, they need therapy. But considering the behavior of all the people around, all the people in the movie, it's like, but they're not going to get it because they're not that much crazier than everybody else. So yeah, you know, it is this thing where just, yeah, that movie can pull it off. Halloween 6 can't, and I think an argument could be made that this can't either. It, again, ultimately, personally, I find that it works. You know, he's that convinced that it won't hurt. And he needs, yeah, you know, he needs for his father to be more, you know, he needs, yeah. But I do get people who say that it's not. And again, don't agree with this review, but they put it well. The gimmicks here break down, taking with them the fragile artifice, plausibility, authenticity, and emotional truth that Shyamalan has crafted. Samuel Jackson plays a comic book art collector named Elijah, as in The Prophet, and his stare could probably burn a hole through Superman's Fortress of Solitude. Beautifully well-made, intelligent films like this don't come along very often. It is worth seeing and sustains the interest we have in what Shyamalan might do next. Yeah. Genesis of an Unwitting Hero. Excuse me. This usually helps my back, but it's not doing the job right now. Okay, so we're on page 12 of 50. And page 6 of 50 was where the review stuff started, so. And almost 20 minutes. Yeah, I think this pace fits. And Shyamalan is a brilliant young director. In Unbreakable, he may not have a lot to say, but I like the way he says it. Thrill kill plots, cardboard characters, and zap-pow editing are not for Shyamalan, who takes his good, thoughtful time to snare audiences in his dark web. Dreary, though spiritually sound. Excuse me. The story is propelled by the idea that we live in a world so desperate for heroes that people can go to extreme measures to either imagine or create them. That is a very good, yes. Although the subject matter is fantastical, Shyamalan keeps it down to earth with moody realism and a refusal to overstate anything. Excuse me. An engaging and intriguing yarn. Unbreakable may not be beautiful, but it sure has character. And this, most viewers, especially those swept up by The Sixth Sense, are likely to find it a grave disappointment. And I mean, that is basically it. Yeah, it didn't. The movie didn't do all that well, and you know, maybe people expected another Sixth Sense. Maybe it was the marketing that failed. Maybe it really was just too niche. You know, maybe there weren't enough people who liked it, or maybe the people who would have liked it were too embarrassed by their predilections. I don't know. A work of transcendent filmic genius, one that acknowledges the audience's expectations, confounds them, rebuilds them, and ends up using them to brilliant, astonishing advantage. I would have to agree. And tremendously interesting film. One guy called it unwatchable. It needs structure and it doesn't have it, says one. In the long run, I suspect this film will prove forgettable, although a more excruciatingly well-made forgettable picture you're not likely to see. I found it quite unforgettable. That's what it is. Once again, I've only watched it twice now, and one of those times was 10 years ago. There are many movies that I've watched since that I have a much harder time remembering. Even ones I've watched more than once. This one, was there anything that I totally didn't remember? I think I had forgotten just how many times the disasters are mentioned. I remember the realization there at the end that Elijah caused several terroristic disasters, not, the train crash that obviously remember because we saw, it's, you don't forget that part, but the other ones, the mentions of them were so subtle that I had forgotten how many times they are. I mean, it's, other than the ending, it's maybe 3 times that those are mentioned, isn't it? So, yeah. A well-crafted, strongly acted film. Unbreakable is a film that begins with a train wreck and then, figuratively speaking, becomes one. See, you gotta be careful about that kind of thing. It's like how, anybody who doesn't like intolerable cruelty can say that the movie lives up to its title, and if you don't like the Star Wars episode 3, you can refer to it by saying, what's that Obi-Wan line? Stop it, I can't bear to watch anymore. Something like that. If you can manage that precious tentative suspension of disbelief, you'll find Unbreakable a rewarding meditation on the nature of heroes, both comic book and otherwise. Emily Blunt. I'm pretty sure that's not the actress, but yeah, I mean, more than one person can have the same name. Doesn't mean that they should be purged from the voter roll, but I don't know, I do kind of like the idea that, what was she like right now? She's like Mary Poppins. I don't know Emily Blunt from very much. She's in the Adjustment Bureau. What's it called? The Edge of Tomorrow, I think it's called. And she could have been Black Widow, which, now when I watch, watching Edge of Tomorrow, knowing that she could have been Black Widow, That would have been interesting. That would definitely, yeah. Oh, right. She's in the second Huntsman movie. And I think she's the one, yeah, there's an interview with all three of the stars, and the, her, well, sorry, not three stars, rather her, Chris Hemsworth, and the Charlize Theron, Tyron. I really should know that. I looked it up, and I try to remember things like that. Anyway, and I don't remember who says it, but I think the interviewer phrases a question a little awkwardly, and it made a question to Chris Hemsworth, and it makes it sound like he's a woman too. Yeah, something like, how did it feel working with these other women, or something, with the other women? And Emily Blunt cracks up laughing and points out that makes it sound like he's a woman too. And then Chris Hemsworth goes full Chris Hemsworth and is like, I don't remember what he says, but he he does a girlish voice and mannerisms and such, and they all laugh, and yeah. I don't know. I find it funny, the idea of her sitting down and doing serious movie criticism. I like her. I have nothing against her. I don't know. Just with the you have to remember, my main impression of her is the Adjustment Bureau, and in that movie, that character doing serious movie criticism is not, yeah. Now, it is especially delightful for those who like puzzlers and think they can gather enough clues to take a stab at guessing the outcome. Or stake a tab. During a conversation between an astonished doctor and miraculously unscathed Dunn, it's a measure of Shyamalan's restraint and his uncanny knack for storytelling. And some people say the ending is terrible. I do think that, if the ending, if you removed the text from the ending, or at least changed it, and it was left with a very clear idea that there will be more, then I think, if you watch the first X-Men movie and you see the ending, if the ending very much says, there will be more, literally the several characters literally say, don't worry, I'm coming back. My character that you obviously liked, because obviously I'm coming back. Let's hypothetically say that stuff was cut out, and you watched it and you didn't get the sense that there would be another movie. You'd be like, oh, that was okay, but I mean, and that's kind of I would like, when I first watched this, that was, I read the IMDb boards and saw the people theorizing there was probably supposed to be more than one. And that is, I think if you take the movie and you don't expect there to be more than the one, I wasn't sure that they were ever going to make more, but, I wasn't that surprised when, I found out that they were making more now, because now is the exact time to be making more. And I'm really, really glad that, the various actors, Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson are still game, yeah. Anyway, yes, if you watch the ending and you are like, basically I thought of it as, well, the studio ruined, kind of, yeah, the studio arguably ruined it, and I'm not going to let that ruin my, experience of it. I don't need. I'm willing to give a movie benefit of the doubt if I can, if it appears that it was meddled with. That is, yeah, and when you, and I don't, I completely understand people who don't, people who take it as it is and say it should have been better. But yeah, when you watch this movie and then you think, well, at least it was intended to have more than one, and it, because the ending as it is, if there's not going to be more, you feel like it stops part way through the story. And yeah, and I'm really excited to see how, what Glass does with extremely competent in the hands of its crew. Sets a new standard for genre pictures. Probably one of the best superhero movies ever made. Excuse me. Manages to successfully slap together a unique mystery, interesting characters, real-life situations to which we all could relate to, and a touch of the paranormal. What buffers the fantastical elements and makes the characters worth an emotional investment is Shyamalan's commitment to the small elements of family life and relationships. Excuse me. I don't know yet about if Audrey and Joseph will play a role in Glass. If they've been in any of the trailers, then I haven't recognized them, but I can see an argument for, if they're not there, for why they might not, but I do think that there are interesting things, given that it's made and I believe set 18 years after this. So Joseph is now, he's not just an adult, he's like, what is he, maybe 12 in this movie, so 30. That's not just, he's over 18. At age 30, you might have a wife and kids, so I do think that could be interesting to bring that into it. An intriguing story executed with visual panache and fine acting performances. Yeah, and this guy outright says, don't go in expecting The Sixth Sense Part 2. Excuse me. Yeah, here are a bunch of negative ones. Excuse me. And see this, I can understand where this guy's come from. Takes so much time and effort to unravel the complex premise that the picture never takes off. That I could see. Now, any movie that asks audiences to think about more than where they parked is a good thing. Excuse me. Give the filmmaker credit for composing thrills without explosions, car chases, and showy special effects. Excuse me. And a lot of people use the word disappointment. It's easy to admire what Shyamalan is trying to do here. It's just tough to argue that he succeeds. Again, I understand. Shyamalan made the unfortunate but predictable choice of trying to bottle the Sixth Sense lightning and reuse it. And an exquisitely crafted film filled with little shocks and deep echoes of humanity. It'll stick with you. I expected that word to be thriller, so. All I will say about it is that its overwhelming horror hit me more powerfully than a locomotive, and that after I knew what it was, I couldn't believe I had overlooked it. Days later, I still find myself obsessed with that twist. And I do, yeah, it's that good. And here's another guy who says it stays with you. Just the idea that this guy, that Elijah has spent, he even says all these sacrifices. He realizes that on some level he realizes what he's done. He just thinks that it's called for, it's right, and that really is just, yeah. The kind of movie that's talked about well after the credits roll. Each shot is layered with delicious meaning, like a wedding cake layered with frosting. Probes the mystery of goodness and the unique heroic powers we all have within ourselves. One of the best films of the year. And I definitely agree. One of the best movies of 2000. And 2000 was a pretty good year. Again, X-Men was I think 2000 was also the year for American Psycho. I believe so, but I'm not 100% certain. Unadulterated poppycock. Sometimes I really love the word choices of professional critics. Easily qualifies as the strangest, most subdued, most unconventional superhero ever made. Shyamalan needs to get out more. His script is intelligent, yes, but also self-indulgent. And he gave it a B on an A to F scale. That's not too bad. Bruce Willis gives a careful, measured performance. And that is it for the Rotten Tomatoes. So, Metacritic critic reviews. Page 28 of 50. Slightly under 2.5 hours, so I will keep going at this pace. Right, actually, yeah, just briefly. This is Roger Ebert's. May he rest in peace. He gave it a 75 out of 100, or his rating comes out to that. Metacritic calculates them. Even if the ending doesn't entirely succeed, it doesn't cheat, and it comes at the end of an uncommonly absorbing movie. And I do think that's what, yeah, it doesn't cheat. The movie, yeah. And I haven't for sure decided yet, but I think I might rewatch this right before watching for the first time and doing a video on the day before, not literally right before, doing the second movie in this shared universe, and possibly again a third time for Glass. But yeah, let's see. Several critics use the, can lightning strike twice metaphor, and yeah. I definitely, from watching clips and seeing people review and such, there's definitely some similarities between The Sixth Sense and this. It's just overall, it's not the same. Mr. Shyamalan may be the only mainstream director hankering for success with a need to understate. He's like Shaq without the tattoos. The result is a mastery of craft that may leave some hungry for more. And that is definitely something. Both, yeah, the first time I watched it and now, I want more. There are some movies where you're like, wow, that was complete. I also recently rewatched The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Those movies feel complete to me. I want to watch more of the same franchise and such, but there's a sense of each of all three in those trilogy are complete movies, and this, yeah, you want more. Yeah, I can't help but wonder. I think maybe also could be interesting to do actual comic books set in this universe. I don't know if some kind of animated thing would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Yeah, and see this guy, I'm just going to read out loud what he wrote. Far-fetched, not only humorless, were literally tacked on conclusion. Yes, more text on the screen. The only thing that's surprising about Unbreakable is how lame it is. And see again, yeah, literally tacked on. And that's the only thing I really dislike about the ending is that, yeah, like if that had happened earlier in the movie and then, or at least there was more of a clear, yeah, that it was really clear that there would be more movies, then it would just be frustrating when the movie didn't do well enough to justify them or something. But yeah, maybe that's part of why it did take so long to make. Not only, excuse me, the the atmosphere surrounding Hollywood right now with this kind of thing, with franchises, sequels, and comic book adaptations. Maybe part of it is that it took him a while to figure out exactly how he was going to follow up on. And I do think it's noteworthy that some of the stuff he put in the second movie in this cinematic universe was stuff he originally was going to put in this movie, but he decided not to, and then he leaned into those in that movie. Now, but yeah, see, this reviewer is very frustrated about that ending, where I find it, I wish it was better, but I think intent and effort count for a lot. I feel like sometimes people are too eager to say, well, it didn't reach the goal. Maybe it got real close, and some things that reached the goal did so without really trying very hard. And I think intent and effort count for a lot. And excuse me. And this review came out to an 80 out of 100. Willis gives a remarkable, wrenching performance. He is the most fragile, indestructible man ever created. And okay, that brings us to Metacritic user reviews, which makes up the remaining 21 pages because some of these are long. Okay, so let's see. Excuse me. Excuse me. And let's see. The characteristics of the characters might be simple, but the procedure of how they are projected is a brilliant example of storytelling. Magnitude, when such a case comes across your life, is depicted with fine details and explicit writing that keeps you busy through glorifying tiny little aspects of the narration. The structure of the script isn't familiar at all. It isn't divided into various parts. It flows fluently. It might be a slow pill, but it doesn't overchew stuff. In fact, if anything, it respects each piece of material with equal sincerity. It isn't your usual comic book feature. It's more talkative. It is weaved out to be completely crafty to the core, as once a character quips to, it isn't commercial at all. Willis is reserved and takes his time like he usually does, and since his character is confused and calculating for the most part of it, it dwells well for the character too. Jackson, on the other hand, is the convincer. He has to be more vocal and sensible. His well-thought-out theories lure you into his viscous web. He is the mastermind and the puppeteer. Wright and Clark, the supporting cast, get their own standout moments, and they hold on to it decently. Shyamalan's vision is sharp and jaggedly on mark. He is well aware of the trajectory of the storyline. He works his way up accordingly. Unbreakable shatters your expectations about the comic book bubble. The perspective is perpetually fresh. Excuse me. Yeah, several people here say that, you know, there's too little happens and it's not suspenseful enough. And yeah, I disagree. You know, I think that, for example, the train derailing is much more compelling, in part because we don't see it. There are so many movies where we see, you know, in the climax of Man of Steel, you see a lot of buildings being shattered, but a lot of the time you don't necessarily see a lot of people, you know, people run away and then don't get hurt because it's a PG-13 movie. I feel a lot less when I watch them break buildings and such in that movie than when I watch Bruce Willis walk through the stairs of all the, you know, all of these family members of the dead, you know, and when he visits the wreck, and when they talk about, you know, just all of this, so much more effective than just seeing. I mean, we've seen a train be derailed in movies. We see explosions in movies all the time. Excuse me. Now, and I should note, a number of these reviews are actually, yeah, I think all the reviews I've read up to this point of the user reviews are actually from 2018. You know, people went back, and I'm not saying they necessarily hadn't watched it before hearing about Glass, but you know, they didn't review it until, and maybe they looked at it differently once they knew that there would be more. Now, let's see. The ending was perfect in tone with comic books and comic book movies. Every superhero needs a villain. Yeah, and here, as with the critic reviews, some of the reviews here, they say that the movie is a disappointment, but they do like it, or that it is good, just that it is also a disappointment. Not everybody who calls it a disappointment thinks it's a bad movie. And this guy gave it a 10 out of 10. A must-see, an estrangement of characters compiles a thoughtfully crafted, well-directed theme of life and strengths. This film accurately portrays a society's clash of morals with a personal need of comfort. Alas, our true society will see this as nothing more than a failure due to its lack of blood and intellectual ending. Love this and learn from it. Now, however, it's not just the acting which is good, the way it looks into philosophy is interesting, and I would recommend this film to anyone. Yeah, I haven't talked a lot about the theory that Elijah puts forth, that comic books are basically, that there is historical truth to them. I don't personally agree with that, but I do think that it is an interesting theory. And there is, stories that impress, stories, there are, things that really grab us so that we retell a story, so that a story, there are stories that we've told over and over. There are, where a similar story will appear in many otherwise different cultures. And I think it is interesting to analyze that. Now, I'm just gonna, this guy gave it a 10 out of 10. I don't give out perfect 10s easily, but Unbreakable is, without a doubt, one of the most underrated movies of all time. It's unfairly compared to M. Night Shyamalan's previous film, The Sixth Sense, when the two films could hardly be more different. The only thing they have in common is their tone, and comparing them is an unfair and unproductive thing to do. In my opinion, it's M. Night's best film, and one that may not have met audiences' expectations, but is far more intelligent and powerful than it gets credit for being. Shyamalan has a particular style to his direction that subtly adds certain aspects to the plot through visual cues. Everything has its purpose to the story. For example, the use of contrasting clothing colors adds to the nature of the characters. Scenes of dialogue are filmed in long, uninterrupted takes that make them so much more engaging because they flow so smoothly and are so well acted. And that's also, to briefly take a break of that, that's one of the things that these long takes do. Editing, some say that editing is at its best when you can't tell it's editing, when it's invisible. Some of the best editing is definitely, but sometimes editing is great because it calls attention to itself. However, an uninterrupted take can ultimately do what editing can't. When it's an uninterrupted take, obviously you can fiddle with stuff with like CG and such, but an uninterrupted take, or what appears to be an uninterrupted take, that really gets you invested. That really makes it feel like it's reality, because editing has to be really, really invisible for it to be invisible enough that it doesn't at all detract, that it doesn't at all call attention to the fact that it is a movie. Ultimately, any story told through moving pictures, there's going to be some subjectivity to it, and subjectivity thrives with something like editing. A long, uninterrupted take is not as, I think of it. Going back to reading, in every scene, the camera moves to follow its subject in a way that's seamless, mesmerizing even. The score by James Newton Howard once again fits the film like a glove and sent chills down my spine during the climactic final scenes. The film is remarkably well acted. Bruce Willis gives arguably the best performance of his career. I would say so, yes. And he and every other character invoke the fullness of possible emotion: sadness, rage, hopelessness, and eventually happiness, and even the most subtle of facial expressions. The actors are aided by a clever script that explores the complexities of power, good and evil, tragedy, love, and loss, and what it means to be a hero. It's ambitious, and it balances its many themes with genius dexterity. I would describe Unbreakable as the smartest superhero ever made. Its twist ending, contrary to popular opinion, is not intended to be a what moment, but instead it adds another thought-provoking layer to the beautiful character arcs. The film was well ahead of its time, written long before the superhero genre was thought to be full of potential, and it still holds up to this day as a masterfully told story of ordinary to extraordinary. And again, this review is from 2018, this year. If you watch this in 9 days from now, no longer this year. Story 10, acting 10, script 10, visuals, sound 10, entertainment value 10, overall score 10 out of 10. And And this other reviewer says, it really does make you think about mental health and health in general. Let's see. Okay, another review from 2018, and this guy gave a 7 out of 10. Well, I must confess I was expecting a bit more of this movie. Night Shyamalan has a lot of style and some talent that gave us a lot of good movies. The movie lost itself in the details. The plot is a true homage to the world of comics, telling us the story of a man who works as a security guard in a stadium. Briefly, I did read all of these reviews before recording this, but some of them I read days ago. He is like many of us and even has marital problems to solve, but everything changes when he's boarded by Elijah Price, an African-American with a terrible and rare disease that makes his bones so brittle as glass that tells him he's gifted with superhuman powers. Well, the plot seems appealing. Indeed, it's an original approach to the subject. Comics heroes and villains are mirrored in the main characters, as well on several references and allusions that arise discreetly. Some camera angles, the raincoat at the end of the film, etc. The main actors, Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, are very competent and play their roles very well. Willis was particularly good while perfectly embodying the emotional and psychological conflict of his character. But you are probably thinking, with so many good arguments, where the film lost its way. First of all, there are some situations not totally understandable, and some details I think are contradictory, which may indicate that there were some mistakes in script's writing. In fact, it almost seems that the writer has devoted, most of his attention to the end of the film. We'll talk about that later. The first and perhaps most obvious contradictory detail is the Elijah glass stick. It's simply incomprehensible that he uses a cane as fragile as their own bones, and how Elijah could make Dunn's car to put his car on the windshield if both still didn't know each other. I don't think that the cane, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that the cane is a problem as such. It might be that he genuinely doesn't want, I mean, maybe he feels he would be humiliated if he fell and broke all of his bones, but the cane is lying there perfectly safe and he wanted to, I don't know. And I mean, the car, there are ways to find out that information. I mean, Dunn's picture was probably in the newspaper, just from the fact that he was the only survivor, as well as his full name. From the full name and a picture, I mean, if he knows the right people, he could get information such as, what does Dunn's car look like? I would agree it was a problem if he was if David had been riding someone else's car. Also, I mean, it was, let's see, when was it when he was getting, I mean, it wasn't when he was getting back from out of the hospital, was it? Because he was alone. Audrey wasn't there with him. Was it when he was returning home from his job, maybe? Because I mean, again, okay, he finds out where David works and knows what his car looks like, and knows which hours he works. So, I mean, he could very well have come to the stadium and just watched and waited for David to leave his car and immediately put the car there and then left, because David wouldn't recognize him. Now, and then he said, the origin of Dunn's powers is another problem since we don't know its origin, unlike Elijah's condition, which we knew is caused by a disease. I don't think that we need to know. Yeah, there are, yeah, I get why this guy thinks these are problems, and he's completely free to have that opinion, but I don't agree that they're problems. Yeah, and then he goes on, another flaw is the fight where David commits murder, something that superheroes simply don't do. And remember, the movie tries to embody in Dunn's character the qualities of a superhero. In the comics, the bad guys are defeated and handed over to the authorities or die as a result of his own wickedness. When David Dunn kills with his own hands, he is closest to a vigilante than a hero, no matter the good intentions. And I think that that's the movie kind of saying, well, realistically, he would probably end up killing. I mean, how do you stop this guy without hurting him really badly, possibly even killing him? Let's say that Dunn punched him. I mean, he would break a number of the man's bones with very little effort there. I think the movie is basically saying, maybe I'm wrong, I think the movie is saying if you tried to be a superhero, you would end up as more of a vigilante. And I have to wonder if that's why Dunn is in the psychiatric institution in Glass, because I mean, if he's going around, that's called vigilantism, and in the real world, you don't get away with that forever. If you keep going, people don't, thank you, and no, you get arrested. You're not allowed to do that. Now, I mean, you'll note that it's a newspaper headline. It's not like, a bunch of cops saying, "I'm really glad he did that." No, the cops might have a serious problem with it, but the newspaper, of course, is like, he saved 2 kids. He's a hero. Excuse me. And it's also, at the start of the movie, it seems things seem kind of hopeless, so that there at the end, Despite these negative notes, Unbreakable is a film that does what it sets out to do and entertains the audience very well, mainly due to the central idea of the plot, the excellent performance of the actors, and the unexpected plot twist in the end. Without the final twist of the story, this movie probably would have been a disappointment, a brilliant idea for a movie that would have ended badly used. Surprising ending ultimately saves the film from that destiny, making the audience forget previous mistakes. Again, he's entitled to his opinion. And this guy gave it a 9 out of 10. The review is from 2017. Oh, I realize now they're not all of these are in the right order, because that one's from 2017, the next one from 2018. Anyway, M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable is one of the best films ever made, period. Everything about this film is almost perfect. Bruce Willis is amazing as the character David Dunn, as well as Samuel Jackson as Elijah Price, Mr. Glass. The film is also very quiet and slow and takes its time to build up the characters, and the tone of the pace and pacing are perfect. In the end, this film is almost perfect and is very rewatchable. I absolutely agree. Now, let's see. The orchestral score is unobtrusive and evocative. Okay, this guy gave it a 0 out of 10. Let me just see if there's something that would be fun to read out. Well, he closes it by saying, "I don't get it," and I would have to agree. You're free to not like the movie, but giving it a 0 out of 10. I hate to be the guy who says you just don't get it, but since you brought it up, now, let's see. We are on page 38 now, so let's see if, and almost 3 hours. This guy gave it a 9 out of 10 and says, "This is proof that The Sixth Sense wasn't a fluke and Shyamalan can still make great movies." And I do, yeah, it's very true. That is something, in some ways it's very similar, but ultimately it is a very different movie. And yeah, I just hope that it wasn't only these 2 good movies he had in him, but yeah. It really sticks out among superhero flicks because it's much more of a psychological thriller than an action blockbuster. Bruce Willis was great and Samuel Jackson was badass as usual. The film was incredibly gripping, intense, with some emotional moments. While the ending isn't as impactful as The Sixth Sense, it was still a great unexpected twist. One of M. Night's best and a great superhero movie. I think I may have already said this, but I think it's one of the best of the superhero movies. And let's see. And this guy gave it a 10 out of 10. In 2015, Unbreakable isn't a film, it's an experience. An invitation into the mind of its unique director that presents us to his vision of a mysterious and strange thriller. Unbreakable will engage your brain and keep you thinking to the end because of the insane plot twists and interesting story. This is another success from visionary filmmaker Shyamalan that serves as both a thriller and an original work. When I was actually going to do a video on this movie about a month ago, and I decided to move it to here so that, you know, since I only do one movie, I usually only do one video per week, one, you know, subject, movie or game or the like. I moved it so that I could make room for Widows, and I am really, really glad that I did. I knew that I would still have time to do it before Glass. I would be very frustrated if I couldn't do both this and the next one before Glass. Okay, this one, I'm just gonna read the This guy gave it a 4 out of 10 in 2015. Bruce Willis seems angry at his wife. He lets go at his hand. Now he's with an old lady. Can't remember the amount of sick days. 5 years, no sick days. He wants a raise. It's clear. On a serious note, 35 minutes in, we see an interesting performance, and Bruce Willis is still throughout. Weird to say that bad things can happen at a football game other than bad halftime shows and overpaid arrogance. College Humor very recently did a really great video on it with Brennan, who's my favorite newcomer to College Humor in quite some time. And I really love the CEO, series that he just nails it, in which they talk about what's so bad about football, the injuries, and I direct you to that. Not that I think that the guy writing this review is ever going to watch this video. Back to the text. The best thing about this movie is the raincoat makes him see. Okay, I'm not going to read that. And Why can't there be a man being sexed for once and a woman to avenge him? I bet I have to make it if I want it. Isn't there at least... Aren't there some? I mean, there are female-led superhero movies. It's just there's only the one good one, Wonder Woman. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, that sure was something. That was text. I can confirm that was text written in the English language. Now, and a lot of people say that it is boring or can seem boring. Very good. This guy gave it a 7 out of 10 in 2013. Very good movie that can touch you and show you that a movie with a hero doesn't have to be dynamic, full of action, and CGI with exploding cities. It's very, relaxing, smooth, and calm with a good ending. And this guy gave it a 9 out of 10 in 2013, just wrote, awesome. And I really like where the plot of this movie went. Gives a realistic approach to typical superhero cliches. Give it an 8 out of 10 in 2011. And page 45, we're almost there. Yeah, and this guy in 2011 said, I really hope they make an Unbreakable 2. And let's see. A modern masterpiece. Great movie. Get a 10 out of 10 in 2007, sorry. And we appear to have reached the end. And yeah. Yeah, and here's the guy who says, intriguing concept which was really poorly handled. And that's also something that others say, and I see what they mean and disagree. Now, yeah, here is my old IMDb review, and I'm just going to read the parts that I think are relevant. Yeah, this film kept my interest throughout, and I gave it a chance because I'm interested in comic books and was not disappointed. Be aware that you shouldn't expect a comic book film or an action piece based on comics. And since it's M. Night Shyamalan's work is about the build of the atmosphere and the twist in the end. On that, I can't help but be impressed, in fact, by all three. The film has something of an undertone of comic books without ever losing seriousness, as so often happens when the silver screen is such projected onto it. And that achieves that masterfully. It's lighting, cinematography, editing, all top notch. The acting hardly possesses any flaws. The writing is solid, though a few scenes, lines came off silly. Beauty and depth herein is commendable. Humor is a fitting dry wit. The film is disturbing at times. References to both comics and comic book films are great. The twist I found to be breathtaking. I won't claim that I got everything about this movie, but I was definitely intrigued. Pacing is deliberate. I recommend this to comic fans mature enough to appreciate the film that deals with medium without colorful costumes or grand scale fights. There are more of us than some might think. And I recorded for 3 hours, 7.5 minutes, according to the timer, which I didn't start right away because I forgot. Again. I guess there's not much left to say. I'm really glad that M. Night made it. I'm really glad that he's now been able to make another one with these characters, and I am really, really excited for Glass, as well as the next in this cinematic universe. And yeah, I think that it has so much to say, and I get why some feel like some of that is pretentious. I don't really agree. I've seen movies that I would consider pretentious, and yeah, what can I say? I feel like he manages. I mean, ultimately, pretentiousness. That's I'd say that there are parts of certain Quentin Tarantino movies that feel pretentious. Other times, Quentin Tarantino can really balance it brilliantly, but sometimes he doesn't quite. And I just feel like this movie does balance it. It's absolutely, yeah. And yeah, I'm really, really glad that both actors returned to the role. I mean, I could completely understand if Bruce Willis was done with done with returning to franchises that had been dormant for a while after Die Hard. I don't think there's any way to defend the fifth Die Hard movie. I think the fourth, other than the awkwardness of having to censor the iconic swear word, I think there are things about it that are, I mean, it is a Die Hard movie, just kind of with more of a like the laws of physics. It's a Die Hard movie in a transporter kind of universe. The laws of physics don't completely, but the way he behaves is still very Die Hard, which I didn't really get in the fifth one. And there are definitely good things about the third, and obviously the first two are great. So, but yeah. And apparently they're gonna do like a prequel, and it's probably not gonna be Willis. It's gonna be someone who can portray a young Willis. So yeah, I mean, I'll probably watch it. I've watched all of them. So, and I guess that is basically, yeah. And I'm really glad that Samuel Jackson gets to show in this movie. I realize it's not the only one. In the first Jurassic Park movie, he's also somewhat subdued compared to. And I think that was also before. I mean, his current image is, it was born in Pulp Fiction, which came out. I think Jurassic Park is 93 and Pulp Fiction is 94. So ever since then, because that's something that Quentin Tarantino is really, really good at, finding an actor and, not always someone we don't know, but making you see them in a light that you hadn't before, I'm not sure if Christoph Waltz would have, I mean, eventually he would probably have come through to, American language movies as well. Fassbender, probably. I mean, he was in 300, but you don't remember him from 300 as much as you remember him from Inglourious Basterds. And, nobody expected the performance Brad Pitt gives in Inglourious Basterds. Before Inglourious Basterds, I did not think that I would ever be impressed with anything that Eli Roth was at all connected to, but his performance in that movie, yeah, I think I've pretty much said everything, but yeah, I mean, considering that M. Night is still surprising people and still sometimes puts out a movie that's really good, yeah, I'm glad that he's still doing it, even though he's made so many. I mean, at this point, he's more well known. He has made far more bad movies than good movies, you know. So it really does, yeah. I'm glad he's still getting to do it. I'm impressed, you know. I mean, After Earth, that was basically Will Smith giving his kid a the action franchise for like Christmas present or something. But excuse me, and M. Night was, I don't know that, you know, I've heard people say that M. Night Shyamalan was probably not that excited himself about doing the movie. It was, you know, they threw him a bone, basically, but then he still made more after that. Yeah, I don't know. But I'm really looking forward to Glass as well as the second movie in this cinematic universe, and I hope he keeps making the movies that, you know, I mean, when the movies that he wants to make, when he gets it right, he gets it right. So, yeah. And if you've managed to get through this entire video, I commend you for your patience. And yes, so as usual, I hope you enjoyed watching as I enjoyed watching and recording, and I will catch you next time.